On April 18, 1942, 80 American airmen launched a raid that defied belief, striking at the very heart of an empire perceived as untouchable. Yet, what history often overlooks is the true price paid not just in steel and fire, but in flesh, spirit, and the shattering of a pilot's world in the immediate aftermath. This is the unvarnished account of Lieutenant Ted Lawson, a visceral tale of extraordinary valor, unthinkable sacrifice, and the raw, brutal fight for every single breath after the mission's thunderous end. The clock's relentless march pressed upon us, each tick echoing the approaching moment of truth. Our planned launch was etched into the evening of Sunday, April 19th, a stealthy ascent under the cloak of darkness, carrying us unseen over unsuspecting cities. The remaining hours of night would be a grueling marathon through the inky blackness, culminating in a dawn landing deep within Chinese territory. As for our mother ship, the majestic carrier, it would execute a swift, clandestine retreat under the same protective veil of night, hopefully vanishing before dawn revealed its audacious gamble. With departure drawing perilously near, Doolittle himself mirrored the gnawing restlessness that afflicted every one of us, a man as eager for action as any rookie crewman. His discerning gaze swept over each aircraft, a meticulous inspection of every B-25 poised for destiny. Upon boarding our particular vessel, he granted me a crucial, unexpected permission to completely remove the cumbersome seat adjustment mechanism. This bold move, he believed, would allow us to slide our seats further back than their standard limits, granting us vital freedom of movement within the cramped confines of the plane during the long, arduous flight. For the 100th time, his voice, sharp with authority, underscored the absolute necessity of flawless navigation, a critical lifeline in the vast, unforgiving expanse ahead. He then ascended into our cockpit, his eyes immediately catching a crucial, almost disastrous oversight. Someone had carelessly hooked an interphone headset perilously close to our compass. His urgent command resonated through the small space. Keep all headsets and any other magnetic objects as far away from that vital instrument as humanly possible. To hammer his point home with undeniable force, he dramatically held one of our metal thermos bottles directly over the compass, and the needle, betraying the invisible pull, wildly veered a full 30 degrees. His warning was stark, leaving no room for doubt. Ensure no automatic equipment, however innocuous it seemed, ever came near the compass again. We were, each of us, a walking arsenal, a testament to the grim realities of our mission. Every man was issued a minimum of a .45 pistol, a loaded clip of ammunition, a compact flashlight, emergency rations to stave off starvation, a dose of morphine for the inevitable pain, sterilized bandages, and the necessary holsters and straps to secure this life-saving gear to our bodies. Adding to this heavy burden were a canteen, a personal compass, and a buoyant life jacket. We were quite literally walking magnets laden with every conceivable piece of survival equipment, and the sheer weight of that realization, the heavy significance of each item, compelled us back to our maps with renewed, anxious focus. We had studied those charts with meticulous care, engraving every detail into our minds, but a chilling revelation from the Navy boys sent a ripple of fresh anxiety through us, even the most advanced, ostensibly best available. Maps of the China coastline were tragically flawed, failing to accurately depict its myriad curves, treacherous irregularities, and the countless small islands that menacingly skirted its edge. Lieutenant Don Smith, a sturdy man from Belle Fourche, South Dakota, found himself grappling with additional, unwelcome complications. Smitty's right engine suffered a critical blow, cracking a high blower on the 16th during a routine test flight. Fortunately, the Navy, in their astounding foresight and preparedness, was ready for precisely such an event among countless others. Skilled Navy carpenters swiftly constructed a sturdy platform, reaching high up to the damaged engine. Mechanics, working with frantic speed, expertly removed the massive power plant, dispatching it to the machine shops for urgent repairs. Miraculously, it was fixed and reinstalled onto Smitty's wing in an astonishingly short time, just as the mission's critical juncture approached. Near the very end of preparations, Doolittle called us all together, his gaze sweeping over each man. He offered one final, solemn opportunity to withdraw from the mission, to step back from the brink of the unknown. No one stirred. Not a single man flinched. Captain York then inquired if any of the first pilots desired changes in their crews. One man did. He calmly released his co-pilot, a decision heavy with unspoken reasons, and then, with swift resolve, selected another from the 10 standby substitutes we carried aboard the Hornet. April 17 dawned, unexpectedly becoming our last full day on the mighty Hornet. That morning, a new crisis emerged. Our crucial rear gun turret malfunctioned. We toiled like men possessed, working with a desperate frenzy on the stubborn turret. Each wrench and grunt a testament to our heightened appreciation for how utterly dependent we would be on its defensive fire. The gnawing certainty was that Japanese planes would undoubtedly attack us, and those rear guns represented our primary, perhaps only protection. As we labored, an almost palpable tension steadily mounted across the entire ship. The Hornet, a leviathan of war, was now inexorably pulling away from the protective force of its escort, accompanied by cruisers and destroyers that spouted plumes of spray as they cut through the waves. The massive carrier shuddered, vibrant with a new, urgent power, as we plunged deeper and deeper into the very heart of Japanese-controlled waters. We were now a mere 1,000 miles off the coast of Japan, or even less, a chilling proximity. We were undeniably in the home stretch, and every man aboard felt the cold, hard weight of that reality. We continued our desperate work on the turret, cursing its stubborn malfunction, the added burden a bitter pill to swallow amidst the myriad other anxieties swirling in our minds. There were so many critical details to absorb, so many calculations to make, without the crushing weight of a failing defense. My mind was a chaotic maelstrom of information, lectures on strategy, intricate maps, detailed charts, vital photographs of our targets, the constant, nagging worry over our precious fuel supply, and 1,000 other minute, yet critical details. Those dreaded barrage balloons, for instance. My imagination, vivid and unwelcome, conjured horrifying images of striking one of their steel cables in the dead of night, our wings instantly sheared off, or our propellers hopelessly filed, sending us spiraling to a fiery doom. I desperately attempted to dislodge these terrifying visions, forcing myself to concentrate on something else, anything trivial. But even that was a struggle. Ever since the Navy had mercilessly clipped my meager bankroll to a paltry of 14, a persistent thought had gnawed at me. How would I ever acquire enough funds to buy something meaningful for Ellen and my mother, if by some miracle we successfully reached Chungking? So, on that final day, when I stole a precious moment for a quick dinner, a daring, desperate idea took root. I would recoup my poker losses by becoming a cigarette runner. I had overheard whispers that cigarettes commanded an exorbitant while 7.25 a carton in Chungking, and that the demand was insatiable. They were a mere nickel a pack on the Hornet, a staggering profit margin. So, when I returned to the plane to resume my frustrating work on the turret, I meticulously packed 8 cartons of cigarettes and 2 boxes of chocolate bars into the rear of the aircraft, a desperate gamble for a hopeful future. By the night of the 17th, I was utterly tuckered out, physically spent and thoroughly discouraged by the intractable turret. As I finally dragged myself to my bunk, White was already shuffling the cards, and some of the Navy boys were beginning to drift in, readying themselves for another night of cards and camaraderie. They watched me enter, and one of them, with a genuine warmth, inquired if I wished to join a hand. I politely declined, muttering no thanks, when, unexpectedly, one of them performed a truly decent, compassionate act. "Listen, you fellows," he declared with quiet authority. "There's going to be no card playing in here tonight. Lawson's got to get some sleep for a change. He might need it." And indeed, I did. I succumbed to a deep, restorative slumber from approximately 10:00 p.m. until the jarring call to battle stations at dawn the next morning, which regrettably and completely without warning turned out to be the day of the raid. That fateful day was April 18th. After the urgent call to battle stations early that morning, I retreated to my room, awaiting the call for breakfast. I decided to use the interim to assess just how much essential equipment I could fit into my B4 bag. All of us possessed these B4s of Valais canvas, like in its material, designed to be packed flat and spread out, then folded into a more manageable carrying shape. It could even be hung unfolded to keep one's belongings neatly pressed. I attempted to stuff in my raincoat, my shaving kit, shoes, shirts, shorts, handkerchiefs, a blouse, trousers, and a few other miscellaneous items. It was approximately 7:30 a.m., bitterly cold, and the ship was pitching wildly. That's when it happened. First, a muffled, deep vibrating roar rumbled through the ship, immediately followed by the husky, urgent cry of "Battle stations!" Jumped for the door, and I was right on his heels, a frantic blur of motion. We were 3 decks below, scrambling upwards as fast as my legs could carry me. I found other army boys also racing for the top, a chaotic surge of desperate energy. We flung questions at one another, frantic pleas for information, but received no answers. Twice, before I could even reach the top deck, the mighty Hornet vibrated violently, echoing with the thunderous sound of heavy gunfire nearby. I burst onto the flight deck, running instinctively towards a B-25, just in time to witness the cruiser off to our left unleash another devastating broadside of flame, aimed in a direction away from us. Presently, down near the horizon, a low-slung ship began to emit an ugly, thick plume of black smoke. Dive bombers were already wheeling menacingly over it. I must have blurted out 24 questions in a single minute, my mind reeling. One of the Navy boys, hurrying past, barked out the terrifying truth. It was a Japanese patrol boat, and our gunnery had heroically accounted for it within 3 minutes of engaging. "Goddamn! Let's go!" Someone bellowed at me, his voice barely audible above the deafening roar of the cruiser's guns, the crashing sea, the howling wind, and the excited, jubilant cries of the men. I turned and saw it was racing back over the road we had just covered mere minutes before. I was on his heels, saying nothing, the sudden, grim reality gripping us both. This was it. And before we had truly wanted it, we would have to take off now, not Sunday evening. Now, Saturday morning. We were forced to assume, with a sinking dread, that the Japanese ship had had ample time to flash a warning about our presence. All hope of achieving surprise, our most crucial safety factor, as Doolittle had so often drummed into our heads, had now completely vanished. We had no way of knowing then, of course, that no warning had apparently been sent. Perhaps the patrol ship either completely failed to see the B-25 spread across the Hornet's deck, or simply couldn't believe such an audacious sight was possible. Or perhaps our Navy sank it too swiftly for any distress call to be transmitted. The Hornet surged forward, a Leviathan boring a hole directly into the headwind. I could feel its powerful turbines taking up an even faster, more urgent beat, a living beast straining forward as fast as humanly possible trying to shave precious seconds off our journey to bring us a gallon nearer to our distant target. I felt, too, a profound sense of pride. Our Navy had done absolutely everything it possibly could, and had done so in a manner that instilled a deep, almost overwhelming sense of honor in belonging to the same proud nation. I thought of Holly, his tough jaw jutting out, standing high up in the Hornet's island, a beacon of resolute command. As I began stuffing what I could into my bag, a chilling question gnawed at me. How long would it take the long-range Japanese bombers to come out after our exposed carrier? I don't truly remember what exactly I crammed into my bag. Whatever it was simply whatever was most handy in that moment of frantic haste. My mind was now consumed by the terrifying implications of our diminished fuel reserves and the catastrophic junking of so many of our long-discussed, meticulously planned strategies. We had staked so much of our hope for reaching China on the crucial presumption that the Navy could transport us to within approximately 400 miles of the Japanese coast. Even then, it was going to be an agonizingly tight fit. Now we were facing a takeoff from a staggering 800 miles off the coast. It required some swift, desperate figuring, and the sums I arrived at in my buzzing head sent a sudden, hollow emptiness through my stomach. I thought of the elaborate preparations the Japanese must surely be making for us, and I thought, with a fresh wave of despair, of that stubborn turret that just wouldn't work. But most of all, the chilling thought that paralyzed me was our precious, dwindling gas. Army pilots, man your planes! Army pilots, man your planes! The loudspeakers blared, a harsh, urgent command slicing through the chaos. But I already knew. The moment of truth had arrived. Was an immense help, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of preparations. He helped me gather my gun, compass, essential medical supplies, and even the precious whiskey. Lieutenant Thomas R. White, the mission's flight surgeon, and inevitably, Duck, to everyone, had brought along 80 quarts of GI bourbon, a quart for each man destined for the raid. On the ship, Doc wisely traded it in for smaller pence of Navy medicinal rye, a more compact, easier to carry quantity should we be forced to bail out. And I started our ascent to the flight deck, our arms laden with the weighty essentials. Was remarkably talkative, I suppose, sensing my raw nerves. He asked if I thought a moment of relaxation and a quick drink from one of the pents would be a good idea. I don't even remember uttering a reply. I walked straight to my plane. The crew was already there, a silent, tense assembly. I shoved the whiskey and some of the other gear into McClure's navigating compartment, just behind and a step lower than the pilot's seat. The Hornet's flight deck was a chaotic hive of frenzied activity, alive with a desperate, urgent energy, while the booming voice emanating from the looming island barked out relentless commands. The man I held responsible for our malfunctioning turret hurried by, and I stopped him long enough to voice my simmering frustration, though I regretted it the instant the words left my lips. Nothing else mattered now. Nothing was important except getting this massive bird off that wet, rolling deck. Lieutenant Jack Shorty Manch, a Virginian who surely must have been the tallest fellow in the entire Air Force, sprinted up to our plane, cradling a fruitcake tin. "Hey, Clever!" he yelled to our bombardier, his voice bright with a forced cheerfulness. "Will you do a fellow a big favor and carry my phonograph records under your seat? I'll take my record player along in my plane, and we'll meet in Chungking and have us some razzmatazz!" And Shorty, a man in stark contrast to the grim reality, practically skipped away from us through the turmoil. Clever merely shrugged, a subtle gesture of resignation, and dutifully placed the can of hot records under his seat. The Navy was now fully in charge, executing its tasks with an astonishing efficiency that made our already popped eyes pop even further. Blocks were instantly whipped out from under the plane's wheels. The whirring little donkey, the very same one that was supposedly responsible for breaking loose and smashing my plane in an earlier incident, was now pushing and pulling the B-25s into their precise positions with remarkable speed. In approximately half an hour, the Navy had us crisscrossed along the back end of the flight deck, two abreast. The immense double rudder tail assemblies of the 16 planes, dramatically sticking out over the edges of the ship's rear, an odd, formidable angle from the air. The Hornet, with its slim, clean foredeck and its neatly cluttered rear deck, must have appeared like an arrow adorned with pin feathers. Bristling along the surface of the churning water, the flying weather was by all accounts good enough. But the sea itself was a monstrous, tremendous force. The Hornet bit savagely into the rough, house-high waves, dipping and rising with violent force until the flat deck became a terrifying, unpredictable seesaw. Some of the colossal waves were actually breaking over the deck, a chilling reminder of the ocean's raw power. The deck seemed to shrink by the minute, and a brief, sharp fear gripped me, the terrifying possibility of being struck by a rogue wave during takeoff, of crashing at the very end of the deck, and then being violently flung into the churning path of the massive, relentless carrier itself. The Hornet's speed surged, pushing until it reached its absolute top velocity on that hectic, hurried, yet utterly perfect morning of April 18th. The bombs now began their ascent from below, rolling along the deck on their low, slung lorries towards our planes. It was our first glimpse of the potent 500-pound incendiaries, but we wasted little time scrutinizing them, save to ensure that each was meticulously placed in its bomb bay, destined to be released fourth and last. The Navy had previously fueled our planes, but now, with meticulous precision, they topped off the tanks, a critical measure to account for any evaporation that might have set in. When the gauges finally read full, groups of dedicated Navy boys rocked our planes with vigorous force, desperately hoping to dislodge any air bubbles that might have formed in the massive wing tanks. For even a few more quarts of precious fuel could mean the difference between life and death. The Hornet's control tower now began to prominently display large, square cards, meticulously giving us vital compass readings and the wind speed, which, to our alarm, was of gale proportions. I watched our takeoff instructor, Lieutenant Miller, trot up to Doolittle's plane, and to my surprise, climb into the bottom opening. For a time, I genuinely believed he was going to join the mission, but after a moment, he re-emerged and began visiting each of the other B-25s, offering final words of encouragement. We were now all aboard the Ruptured Duck, our destiny sealed. When Miller finally reached our pilot's compartment, he must have stood there for a full half minute, his hand extended towards me, before my mind, so utterly consumed by the enormity of the moment, finally snapped back to life, and I shook his outstretched hand. I had so much swirling through my thoughts. Miller, his voice thick with emotion, wished all of us good luck, and then, his eyes full of earnest regret, he added, "I wish I could go with you." A small measure of relief settled upon us when 5 additional 5-gallon tins of gas were handed into our plane. We carefully lined them up in the fuselage alongside the 10 cans Doolittle had already allocated us. It was a sobering, chilling thought to realize that we were now compelled to fly at least 400 miles farther than our original, meticulously crafted plan had dictated. Yet, my deep concern over this devastating setback, as I sat there in the plane, waiting to taxi and inch up to the starting line, was suddenly eclipsed by an unexpected wave of relief now, at least. we wouldn't have to worry about the terrifying prospect of running into barrage balloons in the dead of night. This, of course, was going to be a daylight raid, a terrifyingly exposed gamble. It was only a few minutes after 8 in the morning. Commander Juria and also came up, their faces etched with the gravity of the moment, to bid us farewell and shake our hands. After they had gone, I suddenly remembered with a jolt of alarm that none of my crew had eaten breakfast, and that all of us, in the frantic rush, had completely lost sight of the fact that we could have brought coffee, water, and sandwiches along. I was tempted, in that fleeting moment, to send Clever below to procure some food, but a deeper fear held me back. I was convinced there simply would not be enough time. Besides, Doolittle's ship was already being pulled up to the starting line, its powerful engines, and those of the other planes, beginning their slow, ominous turn. The Hornet's deck, I realized with a fresh wave of concern, was rapidly becoming an incredibly dangerous place. I found out later that morning, with a sickening lurch, that one of the Navy boys had tragically lost an arm, clipped off by a merciless propeller blade. Doolittle, with practiced precision, warmed and idled his engines, and now we received a vivid, terrifying demonstration of one of our classroom lectures, how to coax a 25,000-pound bomber off half the deck of a rolling carrier. A Navy man stood at the bow of the ship, slightly to the left, a checkered flag held firmly in his hand. He signaled Doolittle, who was at the controls, to begin racing his engines again. He did this by swinging the flag in a continuous circle, making it go faster and faster, a hypnotic, accelerating blur. Doolittle, a master of his craft, gave his engines more and more throttle until I was genuinely afraid that the sheer strain would burn them up. A colossal wave crashed heavily at the bow, sending a torrent of spray cascading across the deck. Then I understood the man with the flag was waiting, meticulously timing the dipping of the ship, ensuring that Doolittle's plane would receive the crucial benefit of a rising deck for its takeoff, a tiny but vital boost against gravity. Then the man gave a new urgent signal. Navy boys, moving with synchronized speed, pulled the blocks from under Doolittle's wheels. Another signal, and Doolittle released his brakes, the bomber surging forward with full flaps deployed, motors roaring at full throttle, his left wing stretching precariously far out over the Hornet's port side. Doolittle's plane, a behemoth against the wind, waddled for a moment, then lunged, slowly but inexorably, into the very teeth of the gale that swept down the deck. His left wheel clung stubbornly to the white line, as if it were a track guiding his impossible journey. His right wing, which had barely cleared the wall of the island as he taxied and was guided up to the starting line, now extended nearly to the precarious edge of the starboard side. We watched him like hawks, our hearts in our throats, wondering what the ferocious wind would do to him, and whether we too could possibly get off in that absurdly short run toward the bow. If he couldn't, then none of us could. Doolittle picked up more speed, holding tenaciously to his line, and just as the Hornet majestically lifted itself up on the crest of a massive wave and cut through it at full speed, Doolittle's plane, with a breathtaking surge, took off. He had yards to spare, a testament to his extraordinary skill. He hung his ship almost straight up on its props, a vertical ascent, until we could see the entire top of his B-25, a fleeting, awe-inspiring sight. Then he leveled off, and I watched him come around in a tight circle, shooting low over our heads, precisely down the line painted on the deck. The Hornet was providing him his vital bearings, Admiral Hawley having headed it directly for the heart of Tokyo. The engines of 3 other ships were warming up, their powerful thrum adding to the tumult, and the thump and hiss of the turbulent sea created additional, deafening noise, but loud and clear, piercing above all those sounds. I could hear the hoarse cheers of every Navy man on the ship. They made the Hornet fairly shudder with their ferocious yells, a sound of raw, unbridled patriotism and courage that I have never heard anything like, before or since. Travis Hoover went off second, his takeoff a heart, stopping near crash. Brick Holstrom was third, Bob Gray fourth, Davy Jones fifth, Dean Hallmark sixth, and then it was my turn. I was on the line now, my eyes glued, fixated on the man with the flag. He gave me the signal to put my flaps down. I reached down, my hand trembling slightly, and drew the flap lever back and down. I anxiously checked the electrical instrument, the small gauge indicating whether the flaps were indeed working. They were. I could feel the plane quaking, vibrating with the immense strain of having the flat surface of the flaps thrust against the gale, force wind, and the powerful blast from the props. A sudden, agonizing fear gripped me that they might simply blow off, tearing us apart with them. So, instinctively, I pulled the flaps up again. I suppose the Navy man understood my hesitation. He let it go and began giving me the signal to rev my engines. I liked the way they sounded, long before he gave the definitive go ahead. There had been a moment earlier, a fleeting instant of agonizing terror, when I had feared something was dreadfully wrong with the left engine. It wouldn't start at first, a chilling silence, but I had gotten it going, good and strong, now. After 15 interminable seconds of watching the man with the flag spinning his arm faster and faster, a fresh wave of worry began to creep in. He must know his stuff. I tried to reassure myself, but then the desperate thought screamed in my head. One, for God's sake, would he let me go? I thought of all the terrifying things that could possibly go wrong at this last, critical minute. Our instructions regarding such mishaps were brutally simple and to the point. If a motor quit or caught fire, if a tire went flat, if the right wing badly scraped the island, or if the left wheel went over the edge, we were to bail out as quickly as we possibly could and then help the Navy shove our 150,000 plane overboard. It must not, under any circumstances, be permitted to block traffic. There would simply be no other way to clear the forward deck for the other planes to take off. After 30 agonizing seconds, the Navy man was finally satisfied with the roaring sound of my engines. Our wheel blocks were violently jerked out, and when I released the brakes, we quivered forward, the wind ferociously grabbing at the wings. We rambled dangerously close to the edge, a terrifying dance with oblivion. But I braked just in time, managed to get the left wheel back on the white line, and then picked up speed. The Hornet's deck bucked wildly, a living beast in the churning sea, and a sheet of spray rushed back at us, obscuring my vision. I never truly felt the takeoff, one moment. The end of the Hornet's flight deck was rushing at us with alarming speed, and the next split second, I glanced down hurriedly at what had been a white line, and it was water. There was no distinct drop, nor any sudden surge into the air. I simply went off at deck level, a seamless transition, and pulled out in front of the great ship that had so valiantly done its best to plant us squarely in Japan's front yard. I banked now, gaining a little precious altitude, and instinctively reached down to pull up the flaps. With a sudden jolt, a cold splash of realization, I understood that they were not down. I had taken off without using them, a testament to the raw, adrenaline-fueled chaos of the moment. I swung around, mirroring Doolittle and the others before me, came over the 9 remaining planes, still poised on the deck, acquired my essential bearing, and then pressed on, fervently hoping the others would also get off safely and that the Hornet, God rest her courageous soul, would manage to get away in time. There was no rendezvous planned. save for the mission's conclusion. Those who took off early could not afford to hover over the ship, waiting for a formation to coalesce, because that would have consumed far too much precious fuel in the initial planes. This was to be a single, file, hit and run raid, each plane an isolated spearhead, flying at unbelievably low levels that are still difficult to fathom. Once we were truly on our way, the moment of no return, we immediately began the crucial task of topping off our wing tanks with the auxiliary gas. We started with the large emergency tank, a temporary lifeline. I knew all there was to know about the ravenous appetite of our engines, but it was still a profoundly depressing realization to calculate that they had already burned the equivalent of 8 of our 5-gallon tins during the warming up and takeoff alone, 40 precious gallons gone, before we had even truly embarked on our journey. Approximately 200 miles of non-stop flying, I hoped, lay ahead of us, a daunting, almost impossible distance. I tried now to vividly visualize the triumphant end of the trip, the elusive airport at Chakao, or perhaps Lishui. My mind revisited the tremendous, intricate planning behind the entire raid, and I recalled, with a fresh surge of anxiety, that I absolutely must not miss the critical signals at Chakao, Lishui, or any of the other Chinese fields I might be tempted to choose. All of them lay perilously close to Japanese occupied territory. There was always the chilling chance that even while we were en route, the Japanese might seize these vital fields. If that nightmare scenario materialized, the Chinese were instructed to signal, "Don't land," by a simple, yet incredibly effective system. But there were far more pressing, immediate things to think about now, as I maintained the sleek nose of the Ruptured Duck, approximately 20 feet above the churning water, settling into the gas-saving groove, a desperate dance with destiny. If all went well on the approach, I calculated I would hit Tokyo about half an hour after Doolittle. My grim reasoning was this: if by some improbable miracle the first few planes got in unmolested, every Japanese fighting plane and anti-aircraft gun would be fully prepared, waiting, ready for me and for the others behind me. That terrifying thought immediately brought me back to the stubborn, malfunctioning turret. I pushed the button on the interphone and told Thatcher to give it one more desperate test. He did, his voice heavy with resignation, and reported that it was still on the blink. Then I switched on the emergency juice, a last resort, but that wouldn't work either. I hadn't built up enough power as yet. Our two 50 caliber rear guns, our only real defense, were pointing rigidly straight back between the twin rudders and would be utterly unable to budge one way or the other in case of a surprise attack. I spoke to Thatcher again, my voice tight with urgency, and said that at the very least we'd test the guns. So I raised the nose of the plane, and when the tail slanted down at the correct angle, Thatcher fired a short, defiant burst into the water behind us. "Damn boy, this is serious!" Davenport, the co-pilot, muttered into the interphone, his voice betraying a hint of unease. We plowed along at an alarmingly slow speed for a B-25, the controls feeling incredibly sloppy, almost unresponsive at that sluggish velocity. Nobody wanted to break the tense silence. We were either consumed by our duties or lost in our own private thoughts. The flying weather was good, unnervingly, disgustingly good, almost a mockery of our predicament. Suddenly, a dazzling, twisting object rushed past our left wing. A startling flash of light. It was truly alarming until I recognized it a 5-gallon can, discarded by one of the planes ahead of me. I could see 2 planes in front, and Thatcher reported that he could see 2 behind us. That discarded can, had it struck a propeller, would have instantly downed us, a horrific, anticlimactic end to our desperate mission. An hour and a half after our takeoff, a large Japanese merchantman came into view, approximately 3 miles off to our left as we skimmed along just over the waves. "Let's drop one on it," Davenport urged into the interphone, his voice laced with aggressive frustration. "Let's do it," another voice echoed. I let them talk, their desperate words a momentary release of tension. I knew I had a far better, more critical use for our precious bombs. "Okay," McClure said, his voice tinged with resignation, "but I bet that guy is radioing plenty to Tokyo about us." It was the only ship we saw on the inbound journey, but by now, no one doubted that the entire coastline of Japan knew, with terrifying certainty, that we were en route. Our emergency tank was now completely used up, its precious contents gone, and we were well into our other fuel stores, a stark reminder of our dwindling lifeline. We drummed along, expecting to see enemy planes every minute, our nerves taut with anticipation, but none appeared. I tried the turret again, a desperate, final attempt, and miraculously, it worked. I had built up enough power. It had to be used clumsily, however, in that the emergency power had to be turned on in the pilot's compartment, a critical delay. I couldn't see Thatcher in the back of the plane, so all communication had to be done over the interphone. The emergency power, I knew, would last such a short time that the turret would have to be used sparingly. Only during an actual, imminent attack could I afford to turn it on. We kept going in, and after 2 or 3 hours, the constant low-level flying became incredibly tiring. I was keyed up enough, but at our agonizingly low level and sluggish speed. It was a physically demanding job to fly the ship. I called Clever on the interphone, speaking to him out in the snout of the bombardier section, and asked him to turn on our automatic pilot. He did, but when I took my hands off the controls, the Ruptured Duck slipped off dangerously to the left, a heart-stopping lurch. The automatic pilot wasn't working. So, Davenport and I took turns at the controls, our bodies aching with fatigue, and I happened to have them in my hands at 2 p.m. our time, when we first sighted the coast of Japan. It lay very low in the water, shrouded in a slight haze that made it blend lazily into the horizon, an almost ethereal presence. I had an ingrained, postcard, perfect concept of Japan. I expected to spot some majestic, snow-topped mountain or volcano first. But here was land that barely rose above the surface of the water, and at our mere 20 feet of height, it was hardly distinguishable. I headed straight for the beach. Many small boats were anchored off the beach, and as we came in closer, I was genuinely surprised to see that they were motorboats and rather nice-looking fishing launches instead of the junks I had expected. I had to keep meticulously low to avoid any possible spotters and to remain out of range of any detecting devices which the Japanese might possess. So, I braced myself as we came incredibly close to the masts of the little offshore boats, my body tensed, waiting for a burst of machine gunfire. Instead, we thundered up to and just over them, and in place of bullets, I got a fleeting, almost frozen action look at a dozen or so men and women on the little boats. They were waving at us. You see, the emblems on our plane were the old-style blue circle with a white star and a red ball in the middle of the white star. Maybe that's what confused them. I'm sure we weren't being hailed as liberators. White beaches blended quickly into soft, rolling green fields. It was the first land I had seen in nearly 3 weeks, and it looked incredibly pretty, a deceptive tranquility. Everything seemed as meticulously well kept as a vast rock garden. The little farms were fitted in with almost mathematical precision, each row perfectly aligned. The fresh spring grass was brilliantly green, vibrant with life. There were fruit trees in full bloom, their delicate blossoms a stark contrast to our mission, and farmers working diligently in their fields waved to us as we pounded just over their heads. A striking red lacquered temple loomed before us, its coloring exceedingly sharp, almost impossibly vivid. I nudged the nose of the ship up a little, cleared the temple with a breath, holding maneuver, and then got down lower again, hugging the terrain. It was all so intensely interesting, so visually captivating, that I truly believe none of us thought much about our inherent danger in that moment. What brutally brought that danger home to us, a few minutes after we came over the land, was the sudden sight and equally sudden disappearance of a large, flat building which literally erupted children as we approached it. A lot of them waved to us, their innocent faces a fleeting blur. I caught a quick glimpse of a playground, a symbol of childhood normalcy, and then a sharp, quick look at a tall flagpole from which fluttered the unmistakable Japanese flag. It was like getting hit in the chest, very hard, a punch to the gut of reality. This was for keeps. I listened with a renewed, grim interest to the insistent voice of the engines. A lot of the unreal beauty drained away from the land below us. We simply could not afford a forced landing now. The stakes had just been raised immeasurably. I clicked on the interphone, my voice tight, and said, "Keep your eyes open." "Thatcher!" "I'm looking." Thatcher immediately responded, his voice equally tense. I found a valley, a serpentine path leading more or less toward Tokyo, and descended to fly lower than the hills on either side, using the natural contours for cover. But McClure, with his meticulous navigation, checked our course and found that it was leading us dangerously off target. So I lifted the nose over a hill, a perilous maneuver, and found another valley that compensated, straightening us out again on our desired trajectory. McClure held a stopwatch on the valleys that went off on tangents, a desperate game of precision. He'd let me go 15 seconds down one, then I'd hop the ridge and find one that brought us back on our imaginary beam. We kept incredibly low, a nerve-wracking gamble against detection. Davenport clever, and I spotted the zeros simultaneously, a terrifying, synchronized realization. There were 6 of them, flying in 2 tight V formations at approximately 1,500 feet, coming straight at us, a vision of imminent destruction. Our eyes, wide with alarm, followed them as they drew closer and closer. They looked, strangely, like one of our own American racing planes, with their distinctive big air, cooled engine, and stubby wings. I kept the Ruptured Duck just over the tops of a dense forest of evergreens, our only meager cover. The first echelon of zeros swept up our transparent nose and then vanished into the metal top that shut off our overhead view. The second V of Japanese planes was now doing likewise, but just before I lost sight of them directly overhead, the zero on the left end suddenly peeled off and began to dive straight for us, a terrifying, lethal descent. I clicked the interphone just as Thatcher did. "I saw him," he exclaimed, his voice sharp with urgency. I felt a momentary relief until I thought again, with a fresh wave of despair, about the turret. I told Thatcher to tell me the instant he wanted the power on, to activate our only defense. 5 or 6 interminable seconds dragged by, each one an eternity. Then I asked Thatcher if he wanted the turret on now. "No, wait a while." He responded, his voice surprisingly calm. My mind was conjuring horrifying pictures of that zero diving relentlessly on our tail, its cannons and machine guns spitting fire. I called Thatcher again, a desperate plea. There was no answer. I thought, with a sickening lurch, that something might have gone wrong with the interphone, and that Thatcher, even now, might be yelling into a dead phone that he desperately needed the turret. I was just about to take a chance and switch it on, overriding his silence, when Thatcher miraculously came back on the phone again. "I don't know what happened to him," he said, his voice laced with confusion. "I can't see him now. I think he must have gone back in the formation." We skimmed along, a desperate blur of metal and fear, soaring over the rooftops of a few small villages. And I began to worry. 20 minutes was the estimated time it was supposed to take to reach Tokyo from the point where we came in. Now, we had been overland for nearly 30 minutes, and there was still no sign of the sprawling city. I saw one fairly large town off to the left, however, and I silently resolved that if worse came to worst, if we couldn't locate our primary target, Tokyo, I'd return there and inflict at least some damage. But just then, we came up over a hill, dusting the very top of another temple, and there before us, as smooth as polished glass, lay Tokyo Bay. It was brilliant in the midday sun and looked as limitless and vast as an ocean. I descended to within about 15 feet of the water, our Ruptured Duck, a whisper above the waves, while McClure meticulously checked our course. I maintained the same agonizingly slow speed, a gas, saving necessity, but it was nerve-wracking, almost unbearable, when I occasionally thought of the 400 miles plus diving speed of the Zeros. We were about 2 minutes out over the bay when all of us, seemingly in unison, looked to the right at the exact same time, and there, anchored motionless, sat the biggest, fattest looking aircraft carrier we had ever seen. It was a couple of miles away, completely deserted. There didn't seem to be a single man in sight. It was an awful, almost irresistible temptation not to change course and drop one of our precious bombs on it. But we had been so rigidly drilled in what to do with our 4 bombs. And Tokyo was now so incredibly close that I made the agonizing decision to press on. There were no enemy planes visible ahead, a momentary, false sense of security. I could see what must have been Davy Jones's plane, climbing fast and hard, disappearing into innocent, looking black clouds that suddenly appeared around his aircraft. It took about 5 minutes to traverse our arm of the bay, and while still over the water, I could clearly see the formidable barrage balloons strung between Tokyo and Yokohama. Across the river from Tokyo, there were no open beaches where we could have landed. Every single inch of shoreline was taken up with busy wharves. I could see some dredging operations, actively filling in more shoreline, just as we had been told we would see. We came in over some of the most beautiful yachts I've ever seen, a surreal sight amidst the impending chaos, then over the heavier ships at the wharves, and finally, perilously low over the first of the rooftops. I gave the ship a little more throttle, for we seemed to be creeping along in a dream-like state. In days and nights of dreaming about Tokyo, contemplating its 8 million inhabitants, I had formed the impression that it would be tightly packed, densely concentrated like San Francisco. Instead, it spread sprawlingly, an endless urban canvas. Across the landscape, much like Los Angeles, there was an aggressively modern sameness to much of it, an unsettling uniformity, and now, as we came in very low over it, a bad feeling washed over me, a gnawing doubt that we wouldn't find our specific targets amidst the vastness. I had to stay incredibly low, and thus could only see a short distance ahead and to the sides. I couldn't risk ascending to take a good look without instantly drawing anti-aircraft fire, which I grimly figured would be devastatingly accurate by now, because the planes that had come in ahead of me had all bombed from 500 feet. The buildings grew taller, towering over us, and I couldn't discern individual people on the streets below. I was almost directly on the first of our objectives before I even saw it. A sudden, stark realization. I gave the engines full throttle, a roaring surge of power, as Davenport adjusted the prop pitch to get a better grip on the dense air. We climbed as quickly as humanly possible to 500 feet, executing the precise maneuver we had practiced relentlessly for a month and discussed with meticulous detail for 3 additional weeks. There was just enough time to get up there, level off, attend to the crucial routine of opening the bomb bay doors, make a short, precise run, and then let fly with the first bomb. The red light blinked ominously on my instrument board, a silent confirmation, and I knew the first 500-pounder had gone. Our speed was picking up, accelerating rapidly. The red light blinked again, and I knew Clever had released the second bomb. Just as the light blinked, a black cloud, thick and menacing, appeared about 100 yards or so in front of us and rushed past at great speed, a violent warning. Two more appeared ahead of us, roughly on the line of our wingtips, and they too swept past, their proximity terrifying. They had our altitude perfectly, a chilling accuracy. But they were leading us too much, their aim just slightly off. The third red light flickered, and since we were over a flimsy area,